Hey all, my name is Blair Sinta. Welcome to the podcast, Recording Drums. Today I'm talking to the UK-based drummer, Samson Jatto. I hope that I'm pronouncing that right, actually. Samson Jatto, perhaps? I didn't clarify with him. Anyway, I discovered Samson through Instagram. We just started trading messages. I loved his videos and the sounds he's getting. He's got a great feel, great pocket, and we just kind of did the Instagram thing, trading messages, and eventually I asked him if he wanted to talk about this, and it was really interesting because he said, "I'm not sure I have much to add, man. My thing is so minimal, and I'm so new to this." He said, "But maybe I can provide like the cheapest way or easiest way for drummers to get into recording." And lo and behold, he really had some interesting things to say about how he got started recording himself, why he started recording himself. The space that he's in, space he does all this stuff in, which is super small, compact, in some of the super creative ways he is finding ways to get bigger sounds in a really incredibly small space. So super inspiring conversation, really fantastic dude. If you don't know Samson, he's played with Kylie Minogue, Dia Lupa, Now, James Arthur. So he's really making his way around UK, London, working his way through the scene. Yeah, super great dude, super inspiring talk. As always, my courses are for sale. I am here for lessons, recording tracks too. If engineers are out there, producers, I'm available for tracks. You can find everything through my website, blairsinta.com. It's all right there. All right. Let's check out Samson. Great dude.
I actually don't use Ableton. It's definitely something I've wanted to in the past. I actually use Logic X, just because I'm familiar with it. And I don't know, I feel like when you get sort of into something, it's quite hard to make that transition to, like another DAW. But I'm okay with Logic. To be honest, it's one of those things I wasn't actually particularly good or interested in. Actually, it was only when I started wanting to record myself and record drums, I kind of had to learn how to use Logic properly. But I know like a lot of people who are happy recording drums in Ableton, and it's great for them. Obviously, I know a lot of engineers use Pro Tools, and I've seen just from stuff I've done in sessions with people and engineers and watch them do stuff on Pro Tools. It's super impressive what they can do really quickly. Right. And I know just from looking on Logic, you can't quite do, I think you can do the same things, but maybe just not as quickly or as good, I'd say. But it's working for me so far.
Yeah, I think they all have their own kind of like niches of like what Ableton definitely has some very cool things in it.
Yeah.
My experience with recording live things in Ableton is that it doesn't sound quite as good.
Okay.
It's been a few years since I've actually tried it though, and they beat it. So maybe it's better, but
to
me, like acoustically coming through Ableton, there's just like a sonic thing. I don't know.
Yeah. And I think, like you say, they're definitely used for different things because live, Logic, it's not really the one. It doesn't. It's not reliable, but Ableton seems to be amazing live. And
and Ableton goes so deep with people putting video through it and
exactly
changes and sound changes and
and when it comes to recording, it just seems like Pro Tools just seems to be the one.
I mean, it's definitely the staple. But man, I gotta say, Logic is pretty mainstream at this point.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
So it's funny to me that when I hit you up, you were like, man, I'm kind of a newbie. I don't know. Was it like a pandemic thing or
do you know what?
The stuff you're doing sounds killing. And I obviously noticed that on Instagram. I was like, wow, this is dope. Your shit's dope. So
thank you. For me, I've always been into recording and, in terms of, I've always just wanted to work with different artists and get involved in, writing and recording with them, but I haven't had, like a ton of opportunities because a lot of my work has been live the last, since I've been working in music, which hasn't been that long. It's been about 10 years or so. I've mainly, obviously just been mainly playing live.
Yeah.
And whenever I've gotten the opportunity to work in the studio with people and, underground upcoming artists, I've always just enjoyed it, always asked loads of questions.
Yeah.
And I've always felt like, it kind of works well with my playing because live, I'd say I'm more of a groove-based drummer, and I really love music. I really love playing the song. So playing live, working, the artists I tend to work with, they tend to want and expect that because that's the reason why they've, obviously got me to play on the gig. But obviously there are a lot of acts who, and, musical directors who maybe want more. And that's never necessarily really been my thing. So I've always felt like I prefer to be in the studio where that discipline is a bit more respected, I'd say. And then there's another artist I work with called Neo, who's an amazing R&B artist. She's actually done quite a few American tours, so that's actually brought me to America quite a bit.
Okay.
And I remember it was around the time she was doing her second album. Around that same time, I thought I wanted to start recording myself just because I just wanted to hear how my playing, was sounding.
Okay.
So what I basically, going back a bit further, my whole background in terms of playing drums was mainly playing in bands when I was in school. So I never really got that true chance to practice properly. Okay. I was almost kind of practicing in rehearsals in my school band or whatever or my college band.
Yep.
And then I sort of started, finished university and all of a sudden found myself in like a professional situation, working with professional artists. And I rented out this garage near my area because there were a few drummers who were renting out the same garage. And it just had a drum kit in there. It had no power, just had like battery powered lights. And I just ended up rented there just so I could basically practice.
Yeah.
Because I hadn't really done.
That's in London?
Yeah, that's in London. Yeah, that's where I live, in London. And, within a few months, this was back in 2011, 2012, obviously I noticed a massive difference in my playing, being able to really focus on things, solidly.
Yeah.
And fast forward after that, a few years later, I ended up become the main tenant at this place. It essentially became my space.
Okay.
And I started wanting to record myself. And this was back in 2017. So I've got a Zoom H5.
Okay.
So I don't know if you've ever used one of those, but it's just a 2-channel recorder. And it comes with it's the little handheld device. Is it okay if I quickly go? I think I've got one with me. Let me go get one real quick.
Yeah, cool.
So I got myself a Zoom H5. This is a Zoom H6.
Oh, yeah.
So that's what that looks like.
Yeah.
Exactly. So you've seen that. So this is the H6. So I eventually graduated to this. But so I started off with the H5, which just had 2 external mic pre's.
Yeah.
And then it had this connection here for the, just some condenser mics there.
Those things sound great.
They sound really good. So I started off with that, just recording myself. And then it's so funny, obviously, when you start listening to yourself, you're like, okay, what you think is sounding good actually doesn't sound that good.
Yeah.
And, I always say sometimes to people, I think you sometimes kind of get fed that line that, if it feels good, it must be good. But actually, when you record yourself, sometimes what feels good doesn't actually sound good. And
those little micro things that you think
exactly
in the moment, you're like, yeah.
And then you realize actually it needs to sound good rather than feel good. And eventually, I think when you get used to how you're sounding, you can get comfortable with how that feels, and then that can start to feel good when you have confidence that that's actually sounding good.
Yeah. Did that Zoom start to give you a awareness of sonically how you were sounding too?
Yeah, like it really really highlighted just my general balance, dynamically between my limbs.
Yep.
And just consistency. The first time I used that, I remember I was quite harsh on myself, to be honest, because I was working on a particular exercise. I think I was doing like a bass drum exercise. So it wasn't altogether there anyway. But sometimes when you're practicing these things, I think you think you're getting, you're getting it better than you actually are. So when I listen to myself in the recording, I was like, okay, it's really sounding really weak, and and like the dynamics weren't really there with the bass drum. And then 2 weeks of doing that, and you notice the improvements, and you're like, actually, you can really improve your actual playing if you really constantly just pay close attention to what you're doing. And then I think it must have been a month later, I got a Beta 52 and an SM57.
Okay.
Plug that into the thing, and then started really trying to record myself properly.
Okay.
A bit better, basically.
Yep.
And then, as I was saying.
So were you like, I've just put it on the kick and snare? Like, was that kind of the...
Yeah, I just had it on the kick and snare, and then I used the 2 condenser mics to use them as like overheads on a stand, basically.
Oh, no shit. Oh, so that could take 2 extra mics.
That could take 2 extra, the H5, yeah.
Oh, that's kind of dope. Okay, wow.
It's really cool. So you basically have 4 channels.
Yeah.
And then, so then I noticed, I felt like my recording was getting a bit better. And then, as I mentioned, this artist, Neo, I ended up recording one of her tracks for her album in the not by myself, but in the studio.
Okay.
And again, I was sort of trying to pay attention to what was going on in the studio, and I felt like at that point I was starting to get better at recording, because I was starting to really hear and know how I'm sounding and like how to approach it.
So much of it is just internal balance, man. And if you could, I'm sure you made an impression because you were already practicing like that, listening like that. So when you went into with a real situation.
Yeah, exactly. And I noticed after a while, I felt like, because I had been in recording situations before, but typically it felt like it would take longer to get to where I wanted to be, or where the engineer or the producer wanted to be in the track, which is fine. It's typical, sometimes you go into these situations literally just being sent the track in the morning of the day you're meant to be at the studio, and it takes a while to sort of get into the flow. And even still, if you've had the track for a while, sometimes you might not just get it right until you're just with the people there and them sort of guiding you through the song. But I found once I started recording myself more and more, when I was getting into these situations, I found it a lot easier to sort of get straight to the point in terms of where I felt the song needed to be. And that happened to be where, maybe the engineer or the producers felt the song should be going as well, which is cool.
Right.
And then, I think I probably used that H5 for about a year. And then I got like the H6, which is like a Navigator. I'm just kind of mentioning all this just because it's really easy for like young drummers to really just start recording yourself. And
it's interesting to me that you can have the stereo, overhead or whatever, depending on the length of your cables from your 57 and your 58. You could do a lot with that.
Yeah. And this. So eventually, when I got this H6, this adapter comes off, and it comes with a mid-side mic, so you can use that one instead of top.
You're deep in it, dude.
Yeah. And then after that, I realized you can get a Navi adapter, which is this, and then that gives you a Navi 2 external XLRs. So now you have 6 channels, 6 XLR mics that you can put in. So then after that, that's when I was going kick, snare, rack, floor, and 2 overheads, or 2 kicks, 2 snares, 2 overheads, whatever I wanted to do.
Yep.
So I was doing that for a while, and then
wait, hold up. So you had to put that in something else though if you wanted to edit.
Yes. So initially with the H5, I was kind of just using it for practice. So I was just using the SD card, and I'll just listen to my recordings on the actual device, or I'll chuck it to be honest, very quickly, I'll just chuck it into Logic.
Okay.
And then after a while, I realized, oh no, actually, let me just use the USB, plug the H5 or the H6 straight into my laptop.
Oh, wow.
And then just record, obviously, straight onto Logic there. And at this point as well, I was still obviously just recording for myself. But I was really into it. So whilst I was still touring, I would spend most of my time recording in the studio.
Yeah.
And then just before we'd go on tour, I would record a bunch of stuff. Even if, for an example, I'm rehearsing for a month now for this tour.
Yeah.
I would usually, what I'd be doing is at the end of the day, I'll take my H6, and when everyone's gone home, because obviously the rehearsal's booked till lockout.
Yep.
But we might go home at 6, and I'll just stay, unplug the XLRs from the Snake, and just plug them into my H6, and I'll just record in a rehearsal studio.
Okay.
So, and I record a bunch of stuff, and then when we'd go on tour on days off, I would literally just be on Logic and just be editing all my drums and just trying to do
loops and samples and
yes, yeah. At first, it could have been me playing to music, or it could have just been general beats.
Okay.
And fortunately, I was always obviously around people in my camp and the crew who were engineers. Like the front of house engineer, the monitor engineer. So I was fortunate that these are all really nice guys that would call my friend.
Yeah.
And literally just show it to them, just, ask, okay, what do you think of this? What do you think of that?
Okay.
What can I do to improve this? And they would give me loads and loads of advice. And
so a lot of it was at this point, it's really just you're trying to get it into Logic so you can tweak sonically, work on EQ, understand compression.
Exactly. Yeah. I was trying to learn all those things, learn how to use compression, learn how to use EQ, learn how to use reverb, learn how to get my drums in, better sort of phase relationships and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And all of that, again, a lot of that stuff really aided me live, because I felt like when I was on tour, I found it so much easier to describe to the monitor engineer what I wanted in my ears. It was very easy. All of a sudden,
they will love you for that until you get to the point where you're asking for certain frequencies.
yeah. When you're getting too cheeky, then I think there's a limit.
Yeah.
But being able to just say, oh, actually, that gate could be a bit looser on my kick drum or my snare drum is actually really beneficial to everyone, because that mix can be passed on to everyone else, and they can actually get a sound that they might be looking for as well, which is cool.
Yeah. And the communication is just easy at that point. Instead of
exactly.
Instead of like, hey, something's weird with my kick drum.
Something's weird. I don't know what's going on, or So I really think that helped me live. It also helped me playing, obviously, in the studio and live.
A
lot. So I was doing all of that kind of stuff, and
also like the balance thing. You start to even the live versus studio thing. Even though you're probably playing a little, I'm guessing you're playing a little more out in a live situation.
Yeah,
you're still thinking about that balance because you have a sense of that internal balance, and the front of house guy loves you like way more.
Exactly. Yeah. Just making sure that signal, for an example, that's coming through the snare is nice and strong, and the balance between that and the hi-hat, means that they have control of the snare drum. They can do what they want to the snare drum. And the hi-hats aren't, all over that, or whatever, or in the overheads it could be, or whatever, just so the overhead balance is really good, which is a lot of the time could be the main mics.
Yeah, you're not smashing, right?
Yeah, exactly. It actually affected how I hit the cymbals a lot, because when you're in the studio, you can't smash the cymbals, you can't smash the ride cymbal.
Nope.
It's going to destroy your recordings, basically. So it kind of affected how I was playing live, even though I guess when you're playing live, you can get away with that. But it still affected the way I was hitting those cymbals. Okay. And I think people appreciated that, at least in the rehearsal room, and not deafening everyone.
So when you would record a whole bunch of stuff and you'd tweak on the road, and then are you selling that stuff?
No, so at that point I was just posting on Instagram.
Okay.
Just posting videos, and to be honest, for myself, I was just using it as almost like a diary, just to see my progress from a recording point of view mainly, and also from a playing point of view, but mainly recording. And I could just see as the months were going by, I was getting better at, just the recording itself and getting the raw files sounding good. And then also just the processing and trying to make it sound, good and meaningful and purposeful, depending on what I was going for. Because I think initially when you start doing that thing, it's easy to sort of get lost just doing anything. But actually, I think it's good to be a bit more purposeful and maybe go for a sound, which is something, some of my engineer friends told me. They said, oh, you should really think about what you're trying to do before you either record and also before you start mixing. Don't just put on compression for the sake of compression. Why are you compressing? why you EQ and make sure there's a purpose to it. So I felt like that, really helps.
It sounds like you really put yourself on fast forward, man. Like just,
well, it's
by your curiosity, just diving into this world. But it sounds like your progression must have been.
Well, it felt like it was getting quick, but actually, so I was doing all of this, and then obviously the pandemic happened, which is kind of crazy. So I was, quite busy leading up, the few years leading up, and then it was February 2020. I just finished a tour in Australia. Obviously, we had already been hearing about COVID.
Yeah.
And then got back home, and then within a month, it was, getting pretty hectic. And then I was still going to my studio because I had my time off, and I was just dying to get back into the recording studio just because, playing live is amazing, but, it does get quite static. You're playing the same thing every single night. And I really enjoy it, but if anything, I was more enjoying the traveling, meeting different people and stuff like that.
They're different energies, right? It's a creative energy versus
exactly.
Energy.
Yeah. And I'd be away for 4 or 5 weeks at a time, and by the third or fourth week, I've run out of drum loops to mix.
So
it's like, okay, cool. I want to get back home ASAP and start recording. So the pandemic happened, and then I was trying to record more, and then I didn't do anything drastic. I just thought, let me just upgrade my gear even more before things get a bit crazy.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, it could get a bit crazy, but I just thought maybe it's not going to be fun. And I just thought, let me just get another interface. So I got a Focusrite 18i20, which is not like nothing special, nothing fancy. But obviously this has 8 channels.
Yeah.
And it's a proper interface and can do a lot more than my Zoom H6, and the preamps are much better quality.
Yep.
And then I got a ADA 8200 ADAT to plug into that, just to give me another 8 channels. So then I had 16 channels to mess around with, which is really cool. But I have to say the whole thing was basically, it's quite a bit of a hustle because, like I said, my garage doesn't have any natural power. There's no power. So
this is still the place you're in.
This is still the place I'm in. Where I'm in right now is a garage.
Okay.
And it's just been basically the person who had it before built a room basically in the garage.
Yep. Which is very small on Instagram.
It is very small.
Okay.
It's like literally, if I try and describe the dimensions, it's literally it's basically a booth. The ceiling, so the height is maximum, it must be about 6 foot. And then the width is about, I would say, is about between 6 and 7.
Oh, wow.
And the depth is 5. So it's about, 6, 7, 5. Okay. Really small room.
It's literally a practice room space.
It's a practice room space. And I've literally just put some curtains around, foam, a bit of foam on the ceilings, just above the cymbals.
Yep.
And to be honest, it kind of, sounds pretty good in there, to be honest. It's quite dead. Initially, it wasn't, because it was just all sort of wooden, the room, inside the room. And, the cymbals could get out of control. But now it sounds a lot more controlled. But obviously, you can't get that big sound in there.
Yeah, but I mean, for what you're doing, it's stylized. That's the thing. It's like when there's like 7,000 drummers on Instagram, and for to me, you stuck out. I was like, oh, this dude's
thanks,
dope sounding shit. Besides your playing, you know what I mean? So, if you're going for the right thing, if you're not trying to go John Bonham in like a 6x5 thing, it's all good,
Exactly. Yeah. I think it suits essentially what I'm doing is a lot of beats and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Where things need to be quite tight and controlled, so it works for what I'm doing. So like I was saying with the interface and the ADAT, obviously I had to find a way to power that because my lights were battery powered. When I was using the H5 and the H6, those are also battery powered. Wow. But my laptop is battery powered. Yeah. And luckily my Mac has a lot of battery life, so I could use it for 3 hours,
right?
And it would still be fine.
Right.
But obviously with that, it's like, okay, what am I going to do there? So I ended up getting, I don't even know what it's called. It's one of those kind of power pack things that you'd probably use for camping or whatever.
Yeah, some kind of
exactly. It's literally about the size. It's like the size of a mini briefcase, a tiny little thing.
Okay.
And it has like 200 watts of power. So I figured, okay, if it's 30 watts on the Focusrite and another 30 watts on the ADAT, that should last me for, I don't know, 4 or 5 hours at a time, basically.
Wow.
And then I just take it home in my rucksack and on my bike home, and I charge it when it needs to be charged. Bring it back, and it powers it up, which is crazy. I literally don't even have any proper power there.
Okay. So what is your mic selection?
So over the years, it's been like a couple of years, but I've been collecting a few more mics.
It's been a long year, man.
Yeah, it's been a long year. So basically, since 2017, that's when I got my first sort of Shure 52 and an SM57. Now I've got a few more SM57s.
Okay.
On the toms, I use just an Sennheiser E604.
Okay.
Just because, again, that was just something I was used to seeing live. So I just thought that's what we use on a lot of gigs. The little tiny clip-on one.
Yeah.
And it sounds great. I use those on the toms. I use an SM57 on a hi-hat just because it's a lot drier.
Yeah.
And on the overheads, I'm using... So basically got a friend of mine who's a drummer sold me some mics, and it's just the Rode NT1, but it's like the original one from like the 90s. I think that got discontinued.
I had one of those. They were great.
Yeah.
Yep.
Exactly. So it's one of those from the 90s, and he had 2 of those, and he sold me those, and they sound really good. And I use those as stereo overheads, and then I use... my wife is actually a singer, and she obviously has her own mics, and she bought like an AEA N22, which is a ribbon mic.
Yep, great.
And it's a really nice mic, and she paid quite a bit of money for it. And after about a year, she just didn't think it suited her voice. She wanted that rich kind of U87 condenser kind of thing.
Yep.
So she was going to take it back to the shop in exchange while she would get a new mic. But it'd only been a year, but they literally were offering her a third of the price that she bought it from.
You were like, I'll take that.
I literally was like, I'll buy it. I'll give you a bit extra. I took that.
I'll give you 45%.
Yeah, literally that's what I did. And I just used that as a mono overhead. So I used 3 overheads.
Nice.
And that just dark ribbon sound just really, really sounds really nice.
Yeah.
And just added a bit of warmth to the drums and more control, because the overheads in that small room, it can get a bit much, but just adding that, you'd think, it's a bit too much because you're having 3 overheads. But actually, the balance between that sort of stereo thing, if you're trying to make it quite wide, you can have that quite low in the mix and maybe have the mono one a bit higher, or the opposite, depending on what you're going for.
Yep.
So those are the mics I'm using. Actually, on the kit, obviously using SM7 on the snare. Yeah. And an E604 on the bottom snare. And actually,
how about kick?
So on the kick, I was using the Beta 52 for a while, and another sort of cheap, wide diaphragm condenser mic. But now I just started using another mic, Audio Technica, and it's called the AE 2500.
Okay.
So, they have the AE 250, which is probably very similar to like a Beta 52. Yeah. But this one is the one that has 2 capsules. So it has a dynamic and a condenser mic in the one mic.
Okay. Yep.
So I use that at the moment on the kick drum, and it's obviously great for, phase, because they're right next to each other. They're in the same unit, and it's just the 2 capsules together. Yep. And actually the dynamic capsule in it sounds very similar to that 52, D112 kind of vibe. It sounds very similar to that. So and then it has that condenser capsule.
You toggle between which capsule you want to use? Is it like a switch or something?
No. So it has 2 XLR inputs.
Oh, okay. Right. Okay.
So you plug in two XLRs and you record both capsules at the same time.
So you're getting two different tones, one mic.
Two different tones, yeah. One mic, two different tones, two different channels.
Right.
And then you choose the blend of how much of the condenser or the dynamic you want to use. You can have them both. Obviously, you can mix them both at the same level, or you can have one higher, lower, or just use one depending on what you're going for.
Are you putting that inside at all, or are you keeping it on the front head, or how?
At the moment, this is just outside of the bass drum, and at the moment, for the last year or so, I've been using just pretty much an open head. So there isn't really a head. There is a head. What I do actually is, so basically it's a bass drum with no head. But what I've done is I've just cut out the strip from the outside from like a PS3, a PowerStroke 3, and just put that on. So the lugs are still attached, and you just have that thin.
That's the old Phil Collins style, man.
And it's just like it means you can just go into your bass drum, do what you want, and actually. It's kind of funny, but when you take everything out and you just want to play that big kind of open sound off the beater, you still get, a bit of tone.
Yep.
Even with that small little strip round.
Yep.
So yeah, those are the mics I'm using at the moment.
I gotta check that out. It's the 8AT. What is it?
So it is the AE 2500 Audio Technica.
Okay, cool.
Check it out. Yeah, it's a really good mic.
Yeah.
Really good mic.
Writing that down.
And definitely, over the, going forward, I guess, anything that sort of tickles my fancy, anything I see, I sort of try and check it out.
So you got one kit in there and you got a couple snares in there,
So, yeah, I've got, you know what? I had, obviously, so during lockdown, I had one kit, that was my studio kit, but obviously I have a lot of drums that I use live.
Yeah.
And after about, 3-4 months in lockdown, I just thought, these drums are just wasting, space at home. I may as well start taking some of these back into the studio. So I took my 18-inch kick drum and a few other toms in there. And I've got a few snares in there as well. And actually just the other day, so basically the guy who was the initial tenant for this place, he moved back to the Netherlands, I think. And he was leaving, so he, recommended me to the landlord and just said, "Oh, you could just be the next main tenant and just you do what you want." And he was trying to get rid of all his gear, and he was just like, "I've got all these drums in here. Do you want these drums? I'll give you them for £130." And I was like, "Oh well, I'll take it." So there's a full drum kit, and there was a bunch of cymbals, like a few Sabian cymbals and some Zildjian hi-hats, all for £130, nothing.
Wow.
And then I took that and I just left it in the back, in the back room of the garage, and just collecting dust. And then I just started wanting to service some of my old drums and some of the stuff I have there. So I took it to one of my friends who's like a technician, a drum technician, and he services drums. So I was giving all my snare drums to sort out. And I thought, let me just bring this drum kit because, I've still got there's a 20-inch kick and a 14-inch floor tom. And I just said, yeah, it's like an old Tama. And I just took it to him and he's like, oh, that's a 1980s Tama Superstar mahogany.
Oh, yeah, dude.
Yeah. And I had no idea. It was just there. And he was like, you need to keep hold of this. It sounds great. And obviously I just went straight away on eBay and found the 12.
Great.
So now he's just servicing that. And then that'll be another kit that I'll just keep in the studio to play on and get a different sound.
That's great, man.
Which is cool.
That's great. So you keep all the drums in the garage, and then whatever you need, you pull into your little.
Yeah. So yeah, exactly. So there's like 3 doors. It's quite well sealed. There's the actual garage door, and then you've got that sort of front sort of patio bit, if you want to call it that. And then there's like another middle section, and then that's where I keep all the spare drums. And then there's just a small room where all my drum, where I'm playing. That's cool. So it's very compact.
And it feels secure, obviously, right?
Yeah, it feels very secure. I'm not disturbing anyone. No one's complained, which is cool. But yeah, it's crazy.
Are you going to be able to get power in there, or that's not really a thing?
Do you know what? You could get power in there because there's a lot of so it's on a back street, basically behind a bunch of shops, and there's a whole bunch of garages.
Yeah. Okay.
And people rent them for different things. Obviously, people are storing cars in there, or old stuff or whatever.
Yep.
And there's also some builders, and they've many times turned one of the garages into like an office.
Yep.
And I've looked by and, chat to them, and they've got power in there. They've built all kinds of stuff in there. So it definitely can be done. But obviously the aim is one day to get into a bigger space where I can do a lot more, because I definitely want to be able to do a lot more sound wise. But I'm still kind of milking this situation as much as possible.
Well, I'm sure the rent is cheap for London, right?
Oh yeah, exactly. It's very cheap. And whenever I've had offers or anyone say, "Oh, do you want to do a room share for this or that?" it's really, really expensive.
Yeah.
And sometimes when I speak to people, I try and like get some advice from people. And there's obviously a lot of keen producers and really talented people who want to do stuff. But sometimes I speak to other people, and they just say, "Save your money until you can do it in your own house or whatever." And it'll be so much more worth it.
Yeah, if you can roll it into a mortgage, that's always great,
Exactly, yeah. Which, when I look at other German, like yourself, what you've got, what seems like you've got, Ash, I don't know if you know Ash Sohn, he's got his own thing.
I talked to Ash yesterday.
yeah, exactly. So he's got his own thing at home. There's another engineer called Julian Kindred. He's not actually a drummer, but he records. He's actually from Canada, actually, initially, but he lives in London now. And he's got like an amazing sort of studio at the back end of his house where he records drums, and I've recorded drums there a few times. But it seems like that is definitely the way to go if you can.
Yeah, I mean it's an interesting thing, because I had a period here where I really wanted to just go and be in a communal space, just to be social, but I could never buy. I mean, this is my garage. I built it out. It's part of my mortgage. And I just, once, like, why would I start chucking out an extra $2,000 or more for rent?
Yeah, exactly. It's just, in the long run, it's a little bit, it's kind of money down the drain, really.
Yeah.
Obviously, I mean, a lot of people do it and they're able to get great results and they're able to get a lot of work out of it. Or it could be for their own individual projects, and it's, they literally just can't do it. I'm fortunate that I've managed to find a space that was my practice space and tried to get creative with it and made it into a space that I could actually do some stuff from there.
Yeah.
I know you kept asking me about in terms of like selling stuff. That's what I started doing in lockdown, because I carried on sort of doing my videos online. And just every now and again, I'd get people being like, "Oh, can you send me that beat? Or can you send me that beat?" And after a while, it's just like, it felt like every other beat, someone would be like, "Oh, can you send me that? Send me that." And then I just thought, I think it was last August, so August 2020. I just thought, let me just put all my beats that I'm uploading to Instagram, be very specific and purposeful every single time now. That when I go in, I'm going to record a specific vibe at a specific tempo, and just put it up and load it up onto a Bandcamp page which I made. Yep. And if anyone wants it, it's just there, and I just put the link up, and anyone can do what they want with it, and they can buy the beats, which is cool.
Wow.
And that's worked out well for me. I haven't made like a ton of money from it or anything like that at all. But it's constantly, just reminding people that, I do have a space and can record drums for people, and people have asked me to do, little projects from them for them from my home. Which is cool. And
most importantly, it's like you're capturing a vibe in there, and that's why.
Yeah.
People can program anything, but you're connecting vibe wise, even especially through a phone, right? They're like, oh, like you're capturing somebody's attention for them to want to use it on a tune. You're setting off something.
Yeah, and exactly, because there are some people, for example, who've used some of the beats and they've gotten me to either, re-record it, or they've gotten me to just record their whole EP for them or whatever. And it's just, if you listen to, obviously, music now compared to 20 years ago, it's not that, it's not super hi-fi, clean sounding, quality sounding drums. It's stuff with quote unquote vibe. It can sound like trash, and actually trash is what people sometimes are after. Do you know what I mean?
A friend of mine turned me onto this record yesterday called Yola, an artist named Yola.
Okay.
And Dan Auerbach, the guy from the Black Keys, produced it, and
nice.
he's really figured out this thing where it sounds like it could be from like 1971, but there's low end. There's like a modern low end to it.
Yeah.
Real kind of head mess. You're like, well, records didn't have that much low end back then because it's really, it's nice and full and smooth, but
it
has that crunchy, vibey thing where it's pretty,
yeah.
it's a cool thing. Yeah. What kind of space would you love to be in? You know what I mean? Because, you figured out a really cool thing in this little kind of janky space, right? And it would be interesting, if you're like, oh, I found this dope studio and it's really beautiful and blah, blah, blah. And then all of a sudden you're like, well, I got to find my thing again, and like
yeah, I know what you mean. Because even when I've done, like I said earlier, when I was in my rehearsal studios and everyone would go home, I'd pull out my interface and start recording my drums. I remember I'd take them home and I'd just be like, whoa, like,
yeah,
this doesn't sound like, me. The sounds are very different. That bass drums doesn't sound as tight. And then you're thinking, okay. And you also, when you're learning these things as I am, you sometimes go through a phase where you're just putting the same old sort of tricks and processing on everything, and you realize you can't just do what you usually do because it's a different sound in the room.
Yeah.
So yeah, like ideally I'd love to have, a big, to be honest, I would say I'm not like that great at sharing. So definitely a space like how you have in terms of being at home and just being on your own would be ideal for me. Obviously my wife is a singer, so she does all that kind of stuff. So we could definitely do something together, but I'm definitely not into the whole commercial space and having 3 or 4 people sharing, or I don't know.
Yeah.
But definitely, like you're saying, I guess I'd ideally like to have somewhere, maybe if I could have, one big room and a smaller room where I could still maintain that kind of sound that I've gotten used to and really gotten a lot out of, and then be able to do much bigger sounding recordings as well.
Yeah.
That would definitely be amazing.
So you have a desire to be able to expand your kind of your sonic palette in that.
Yeah, definitely. I'd love to be able to, create more sort of diverse sounds naturally. At the moment, I'm obviously trying to get different sounds from this one small room. So sometimes I'll mess around with stuff to try and make this tiny room sound as big as possible.
Okay, what's the most effective way you're finding to do that?
To do that? Yeah. Well, recently, on the last few things I did, I took an SM7 into the next door bit, so it's outside of the room.
Okay.
And I had a 14-inch floor tom there, and it's like bricked out that bit as well. So it's just brick and concrete.
Yep.
And I just put the floor tom, then I just put SM57 on top of the skin, and obviously it resonates. And I just shut the door and I was playing, and it just sounded like you kind of get that, obviously that overtone of the floor tom. And just, ran that through some compressors, some stuff on Sound Toys or whatever, some, the Devil Lock and the Decapitator. And it just kind of really brought out this big sound, still very overtony. But when I found like I blended that in and maybe sent a reverb from that channel as well, it kind of had quite a big sound. That sounded pretty cool.
That's pretty interesting, man. So you thought I'm going to use Tom Bleed.
Essentially, yeah.
Chamber in a sense.
Yeah, because it just had a bit of a ring. And I was telling one of my friends, and he said, oh, you should try the same thing, which I'm still going to try now, and actually open up the head. And so you take off one of the skins and lie it upside down and just put the SM57 inside and see what that sounds like. And he reckons it'll sound really cool. So that's the next thing I'm going to try.
It's funny because, the whole name of the game these days is, Tom Bleed in anything is like, no.
Yeah.
So exactly. Now, and that's one of those things about recording that that's so fascinating to me is like, part of the reason a drum kit sounds like a drum kit is because everything is vibrating together, right?
Yeah.
That's the reason, again, like John Bonham sounds like John Bonham because all that shit is just like all one organic thing moving together. So the fact that you like stuck in this dead space and you're like, well, I'm gonna take that thing that no one wants, but turn it into like that's
and it's cool because you have control of it as well. It doesn't have to be in a mix. You don't have to use that channel. But just having it as an option.
Okay, so really here's another question. Were you doing this for a tune or just for like drums?
So this was just for drums, but actually I'm always trying to find ways to inspire myself in terms of, because after a while you can only do so much just playing drums. So sometimes I would find tunes that I really like. Sometimes I'd take samples. I'd cut a little section of the tune where there's no drums, and then I'll just cut it up and do all kinds of stuff with it and essentially try and turn it into some sort of a tune.
Okay.
And then recently I've been trying to just make a bit of music, some rough chords or whatever, chuck it together and use that to inspire a vibe. But also I'd still be quite specific. So I'd actually pick an artist that I like. So on the last one, I remember I picked an artist called Nick Hakim because he has a really cool sound. And I thought, let me go for something that sounds in that kind of realm.
Okay.
And that kind of inspired me to, when I listened to the record that I was trying to go for, I was like, okay, the drums sound quite big. It's still controlled, but there's a lot of ambience to it, basically. So that's what made me think when I was recording it, okay, let me try and see if I can get that from somewhere else other than, a reverb on some plugin or something like that.
Right.
And again, also when I'm doing those kind of things, like you said, in terms of, people, not wanting the toms to be, ringing and stuff like that. Sometimes if I want a bigger sound, I just don't gate the tom mics.
Yeah.
And it just sounds bigger and better. And if you want it to be really tight and, hip hoppy or whatever it is that you're going for, obviously, if you're not using those mics, that's great. If you are, gating them, or I know some people sometimes just cut it out from the sections they're not using, stuff like that. But I found, if you wanted that bigger sound, actually just not gating those drums is really cool.
That's actually what I thought you would say, because without really having like physical room to expand the room sound.
Yeah.
But the idea of the mic on it, that's a whole nother level, which is dope. And one thing I thought of is like, if you were using that for a tune, whether you tune the head to maybe the tonic of the tune.
Yeah. So obviously this is something I've only just started doing a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
And although it was great for what I did, the raw file actually sounded really cool. And then when I started messing with it, obviously more and more of that overtone was really coming out and maybe becoming a bit overbearing. So actually, that's definitely something to look into in terms of actually, I just kind of placed the mic on this extra tom.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Funny enough, it was actually that Tama tom.
Okay. Yeah. I've heard that's what those Tama Super Stereos are good for. You just put a mic on top of the head. That's a thing.
There you go. Exactly. That's what it's used for. Literally, that's what it's used for in my studio. Right. It's literally lying on the floor and just collecting dust, and I'm just putting a mic on top of it.
Yeah, there you
go. That's something to look into. Maybe tuning that tom and making it sound, pulling it in the key of the song. Maybe I'm playing.
Yeah.
So it could actually be a useful tone.
Yeah.
But there's all kinds of. I tried putting a mic in a hose there once, and it just didn't work in that room.
Yeah.
I've seen people do those check out little videos online, see what people are doing, and it seems to work for them.
Yep.
Just it didn't work for me in that room at all.
Sure. Yeah.
So, I've tried to put a mic on the floor and see what it sounds like, but again, in that room, it's not really working. I think every room's, obviously every room's different. You're going to get.
Some people find a corner that works.
Yeah.
It's again. I've seen people put a mic right over a cymbal that's sitting on the floor.
Okay.
It's never worked for me, but I've seen it many times. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's all kinds of tricks that, again, people find with their room where something somehow resonates.
And also sometimes I think, as like, how we were saying about the tuning of that tom, sometimes those tricks can actually just work for one song, not even necessarily in a room. They might just work on one song, and you could try it the next week on another track and it'll just sound out of place and not sound right.
Yeah, but I think half the point is, though, it's something that is in your knowledge, in your back pocket.
Exactly. Yeah.
And when you go on a real session at some point, you're looking for something, or an engineer's looking for something, or an artist or something, and you're like, well, I got an idea. I've done this before. Maybe this is the thing that's going to add add the whatever, man.
And I think that's what I've really liked about my room, and sort of why I try and hold on to it as long as possible, is that it's very limiting.
Yep.
And it's forced me to explore different things, and I feel like it's a really hard training essentially.
Yeah.
And it's really helped me, especially with like mic positioning and stuff like that, and because in that kind of small room, you can get all over the place. You don't have nowhere for the reflections to go.
Yeah.
And my drum tuning has had to be a lot better. Because some of those drums, I could be, even like a snare drum, for example, I could have literally just used it on a gig. Sounds amazing. You're playing in a big room. You take that same snare drum, you put it in the studio, and the ring on it just sounds awful.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter how much dampening you put on it, there's still like an annoying tone that's just, or a note that you don't really want.
Yeah.
And I found that being in that sort of tight room has helped me, figure out ways to try and really make the drums as clean as possible in terms of the tuning. I remember I saw you do something with your hi-hats. I remember I was telling you, I think I messaged you ages ago, and you were talking about hi-hat volume, and you were using 2 hi-hats on the bottom.
Yeah.
And I'd seen so many people do that before, and I just always thought, well, what's the point in doing that? Right. Why are you wasting your nice hi-hats, with 2 on the bottom? And then I saw you do that video, and I was like, oh, that's interesting, because I'm hearing the difference in the tone.
Yeah.
And I was always struggling. I was using, in the studio, I use 14-inch K Constantinoples, and they sound really nice. I was using them live a lot, and they just sound amazing. But in the studio, in that small room, it's just always like just a high-pitched frequency that was just always kind of like ting, ting. You can always hear it.
Yeah.
And it was really, really bugging me, especially when I added a hi-hat mic. It's like, okay, can I even use this? It's a bit annoying. You can EQ it out, obviously, but I really wanted to just, for it to sound right at the source. And I saw your video. I instantly just put another 14-inch cymbal that I had lying around, put it inside, and it sounded like the cymbal I've been trying to get for ages. It's like, that's actually how I've always wanted my hi-hats to sound. I felt like for years of, I'm sure like how every drummer is on the search for, their favorite or perfect ride cymbal, and sometimes it's the hi-hat. For me, it's always been like the hi-hat, just trying to find the perfect pair of hi-hats. And I didn't realize in just doing that, it just got really to the sound that I was actually always hearing in my head, which is super tight and controlled. So
is that only a studio thing now, or you're doing that live?
Straight away, just did it live. As soon as things opened up in the pandemic, I was playing on some other hi-hats that I was using, some 15-inch Corropes, and they sounded really nice. And as soon as I thought of it, I was like, wait a minute. I think the engineer pointed out the high ting, ting, ting. And I was just like, oh yeah, that's really annoying. And the next day I just brought in another 15-inch cymbal, put that on the bottom of it, and it just sounded amazing straight away. So now it's just a thing I just do all the time, to be honest, if I can, or if I feel like it's needed. I think if I was ever playing something a bit more looser, or maybe stuff's a bit more rocky or singer-songwriter, actually some of those overtones sound really nice. But for a lot of the stuff I was doing or am doing at the moment, it's kind of in the way, really.
Yeah. I actually have like certain sets of hi-hats where I just do that because they're on their own, they're just funky. Like,
yeah, exactly.
Funky in a bad way. So I'm like,
I'm
going to use these. That just happens.
Exactly. And that's how I've gotten, I think specifically in that studio, I feel like that's just the way to do hi-hats. It's a really small room. The reflections are all over the place, and it kind of just brings out that high frequency that I don't really like. So I just thought from now on, when I'm in the studio, I'm probably just going to do that all the time anyway. And then when I'm playing live, it's just as I see fit, if it feels like it's needed. Really.
Yeah. I think that'll work on this, on Dave tour that's coming up. I see that working well.
I mean, I've used on the setup, because I've only done one show with him in the summer.
Okay.
And I did that with the 15-inch hi-hats. I had 2 on the bottom.
Yeah.
And it was perfect.
Man.
So yeah. It's great.
Man, I gotta say, it's pretty inspiring, man, to some of your ideas,
Oh, thanks.
You got my brain turning a little on some of these. I'm really curious about the floor tom thing. You know what I mean? My work is a little more live than that, and my thing is I'm always trying to get a little more dry, especially these days. But I just think that what you're talking about sonically is just like an interesting idea, no matter what, or anything. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Like everybody has like I got 50 drums sitting in this room over here. Just depending on where it is in the room, I'm just gonna put a mic on one of them and just
exactly. Just put a mic on one of them. Or a bunch of them and see, how you've seen people do that thing sometimes where they play a snare and they put a tom on top of the snare and they play that. It's like almost that kind of thing. You could just experiment with a few drums and just see how it sounds.
That's the other idea, is put a snare on there, get the snares resonating with the tom.
Yeah.
Like a noise bed that could be cool.
Exactly. And there will definitely be tunes where actually that kind of vibe is going to sound, really good. And
like old vinyl or something. Who knows?
Yeah. And it's just going to add something. Some of these producers and engineers will just be like, oh yeah, that's really cool. Maybe I'll just chuck that in, or do something really cool with it.
I think we should cut this part out of the podcast so no one can steal ideas.
Let's keep it to ourselves. But I think it's just really cool to just constantly sort of be on the lookout. And I think that's why I like the whole online thing and the Instagram and the YouTube. In terms of a lot of the time it can be quite annoying and also it can take over your life a bit. But actually, if you're following the right people, the people that you're into, there's so much just to learn from what everyone is doing. Watching your videos, watching Ash's videos, or Aaron Sterling or whatever. All these guys are just doing amazing things. And every time I see it, I'm just like, oh, that's a cool thing. Oh, you had a Brody Simpson as well. I watch all his videos. I'm just like, okay. Trying to figure out how he's getting that sound and stuff like that. People are so deep. You're hitting on 2 really good points. One, inspiration from other people in their spaces, but also like the limitations that you have and just being forced to find ways to get what you're hearing. The limitation thing is huge. And I talk about that just with mic setups a lot, sometimes I'm worried about repeating myself on this thing a lot, but one thing that it's too much work to do really, but the idea of actually like taking all the mics down. And then when you get a tune to record, to like go like, okay, I'm only going to set X amount of mics up to really capture the sound and not just have a standard setup, Yeah.
That gets very time consuming, which, most people don't have. Right.
Yeah.
But I love the idea of that. Like, I'm only going to set up what is really necessary for this, And
I think that's another thing as well that, over the last year or two that I've been learning is obviously trying out different mic setups and configurations. I definitely went through a period of trying just the mono overhead, with some close mics and seeing how that sounded, and the stereo pen, and I tried like the Glenn Johns recorder man and stuff like that and see how that sounds. And I'll just, I'll find a setup and just leave it for a couple of weeks and then try something else. And I think what can be tricky, I guess, for the mind is sometimes I find if you find something that really works, you kind of get scared to, to take it down because you're like, it's really working. I really want to do it. But then when you do it, you come across something else and say, oh, this actually sounds really good. And like you were saying before, it's just another thing to put in the locker. So, okay, that's a setup that works for this kind of stuff.
Yep. Cool. Yeah. It becomes like vibes, right? You're like, okay, I know what this mic setup does in this room, and I got, when the right tune comes in, and it may be once a year, like who knows?
Yeah, and you can feel confident in doing it and not feel like you're sabotaging the track or losing something from another setup that you were using before. You just feel confident. Oh, do you know what? This Recorder Man setup actually is going to really work.
Do
you just go with it?
Do you use it much?
I've used it a couple of times. Yeah, I've tried it in my studio, and actually, I think I tried them. So I tried both, and I tried the Recorder Man and the Glyn Johns. I think in that small room, the balance wasn't quite right for the Glyn Johns. I actually was getting too much of like the floor tom and the kick on one side, and I just found the balance, it just wasn't really working. That's something I'll probably revisit again, but the Recorder Man actually worked a lot better because it was a bit further away from the floor tom and a bit further away from the kick. And obviously it's very important to, if you can, try and make sure with the phasing and like, I know a lot of people...
That's one of the hardest setups, I think, to get right.
Yeah, because I think, a lot of people talk about doing the measurements, and sometimes that can really work. Sometimes, obviously, as you would have heard, some of these guys, they just put them up and it just works, and it, they just listen to it. It's just like whatever. But I've definitely found, for me, I still think it's a good place to start if you're, if you've never done this before, you've just gotten a space and some gear to try and roughly set these things equidistant from the snare and actually go from there before you get confident and start throwing things around. Because
I think the Glyn Johns setup is an amazing place to start.
Yeah.
And then it's easy to add mics to that too. Add a snare mic to Glyn Johns. It's like, okay, cool. And then maybe a floor tom mic or whatever you need, a little more, have something speak. But like that basic setup, I think is an incredible learning tool.
Definitely. And again, it will teach you about balance in terms of how you're playing, because that's something I've found. As soon as I was recording myself, I found, I don't hit the toms that hard. And that's something I felt like I needed to work on and still try and work on it. Actually, when I'm doing my fills, they start off kind of big on the snare and then maybe on the toms. I'm just kind of used to, I feel like I can hear them fine. So I'm kind of used to the tone that's coming out. I'm just like, I like the way it sounds. But actually, on a recording, if you're not using tom mics, then that can get quite lost and not really come out at all. And a lot of that can be the tuning of the drums as well. If they're too low, they might not come out as well without no overheads as well.
I mean, that's all relevant in everything in there, right? Maybe something's just speaking at a certain frequency that's coming out more.
Yeah.
Are you friends with Jeremy Stacy?
I've only met Jeremy once. I'm not friends with him, but I've met him once or twice. I've seen him around. He's obviously an amazing drummer.
Yeah, he's got good Glyn Johns stories from recording with the man himself. With that setup. So
amazing,
So
because in fact, I'm sure I've seen a video with Glyn Johns talking about working with Jeremy Stacy. I'm pretty sure. But
I mean, literally, it's that thing where Jeremy told me he was like, "Oh man, something's loud," and Glyn's like, "Fucking don't hit it so hard, man." It's like, and Jeremy is an incredible drummer, right? Like, like that guy is balanced and whatever. But you know what I mean? It's still like, that's your problem, man. That's the way he looks at it.
It's so funny you mentioned about hitting hard, because I was playing in like a club recently, a few months ago, and it was like a really small club, and they have a little, the Ludwig, the Questlove little Ludwig kit. They've got one of those. But it's a really small venue, and they don't like for people to play loud. And I hadn't really played there, and I was talking to the engineer, and he was just like, the first thing he came to me, just came in my face, like, you need to play softly. I was like, it's cool. I can see the room, I'll play the room. It's going to be fine. He's like, because a lot of drummers come in and they say they can play quiet, and then they just start, absolutely blazing the drums. And it's like, I can't use it because I can't put them in a system. It's too loud.
Right.
And then he just said to me, so if you find yourself whilst you're playing during the gig, if you feel like you're enjoying yourself, then you're playing too loud. And I was like, you know what? That's actually a great line. I'm going to remember that.
You have to be uncomfortable.
If I'm enjoying myself, then I'm playing too loud right now. That was quite funny. So if anyone's ever in a tight situation, in a small gig, and you need to keep the dynamics down, focus on not enjoying yourself.
I'll tell you what, most of my career has been shit then, so.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
That's great. I mean, yeah. The interesting thing is if anybody actually has their awareness while they're playing, they're probably not the right guy to be telling that to anyway.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
That's actually going to have that thought come back through while they're
playing. Yeah.
Well, man, thanks, man. This has been super enjoyable. I appreciate it.
Yeah, man. It's been great.
You taking the time, and yesterday was like a conundrum. Me, let's do this time. I gotta go. So.
Yeah. No, it's cool. All good, man. It's great to finally see a face, meet you, and chat to you. It's great.
Likewise, man. And please, man, if you come through town, get coffee. I'd love to come hear you play in person.
Yeah, definitely.
But yeah, hit me.
Man, that'd be great. I'd love to do that. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, Samson. All
right, great.
Have a good night, man. And
all right, you too.
We'll talk again soon on the old IG. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. See you later.
Take care.